Hi and welcome to a new series of Azure webinars brought to you by the Cloud Solutions Architects here at Ingram Micro Cloud. My name is Nigel Mullings and I'll be discussing the 2020 Spring Update of Windows Virtual Desktop, which is now generally available. As with previous webinars, we'll split the Windows Virtual Desktop 2020 Spring Update webinar into two parts. This one, which is the L100, and will be a high-level overview of the service. And then we'll have an L300 next week, which will go into more detail around FSLogic profile containers and some of the new features in Windows Virtual Desktop. The L300 will also be broken down into two parts, similar to previous webinars where we had L300 Part A and L300 Part B. Today's agenda will cover off secure remote working with Windows Virtual Desktop, which is top of mind for lots of CEOs during the current pandemic. I'll be discussing the challenges during these uncertain times, and I'll run through the architecture of Windows Virtual Desktop service and also have a look at an enterprise architecture for Windows Virtual Desktop. I have a couple of short demos showing the end user experience and creating a host pool, and I have a couple of slides looking at security and a bit of a sneak preview into a couple of new features that will be available in the next release, which we hear will be later this year. Microsoft have made some huge improvements to Windows Virtual Desktop with the 2020 Spring Update. Remote working is becoming almost the norm nowadays, and Microsoft's Windows Virtual Desktop service is enabling remote working for thousands of customers around the world, and this new GUI enables customers to quickly deploy Windows 10 multi-session host pools in minutes. This is an overview of the Windows Virtual Desktop usage over the last year since Microsoft released the service. The Windows Virtual Desktop optimizations on this slide, which are the light blue squares, have been added in the last year due to a dramatic increase in the service. The service metadata will also be made available in more regions, starting with Europe later this year. Microsoft themselves also use the Windows Virtual Desktop service to enable remote engineering and support remote internships and empower new employees to onboard prior to receiving their new laptops. When we talk to partners about moving to the cloud, there are a few things that come up that are top of mind in almost every conversation we have. The first is how can we ensure that users can stay productive and have the same experience and ability to do the work they're used to doing every day. Security and compliance are always top of mind for our partners, and I have a slide that touches on that in some more detail. The other thing that partners talk about is how to scale up and down as needed and manage the network utilization and their data center usage and costs. Microsoft's Windows Virtual Desktop is designed to address these needs. To address productivity, there are clients for Windows Virtual Desktop service on every major client platform, Windows, Mac, Linux, etc., which gives them a rich Windows 10 client. Microsoft have also focused on a quick start to deploy Windows Virtual Desktop using Azure DevOps pipeline to get the resource up and running. You can find that quick start at aka.ms/WVD quickstart. There's a rich ecosystem of partners to help customers migrate from on-prem virtual desktop infrastructure solutions and modernize the deployment in the process. Here's a quick look at the rich ecosystem of partners. This slide has a few of the partners that work with Microsoft and Windows Virtual Desktop. The majority of system integrators around the world have started to deploy Windows Virtual Desktop on behalf of their customers. Many of them are building specific practices around the service, which is driven by customer interest and momentum. There are ISVs bringing their expertise in the VDI space into Windows Virtual Desktop. You'll notice Nerdio on there, who Ingram Micro have partnered with. And of course, there are hardware partners. iGel were the first to market about a year ago with their Linux-based client for Windows Virtual Desktop. A lot of partners ask us how they can use familiar tools that they already have for Citrix and VMware in the move to Windows Virtual Desktop. Citrix and VMware are two of Microsoft's strongest partnerships with the service, and Microsoft have seen that customers recognize the value of having those partners hosting their services on Azure. Microsoft have also built out their own control plane, which was driven by customer demand for a first-party solution where customers want to simplify and reduce costs. With Windows Virtual Desktop, you get access to a full Windows 10 desktop. You can publish applications, whether they're line of business applications or third-party applications, and access them remotely. You focus on what's specific to your organizational deployment. So you set up your policies, your VMs, networks, configs, and users, and that's what you focus on. You don't need to spend any time worrying about the underlying infrastructure, such as connection brokers or maintaining server VMs to power the service. Microsoft handles the complexity of running the service in the cloud, so you can focus on what your organization needs for your deployment. Traditional public cloud services offer VDI solutions that map a single user to a single VM. This may be appropriate for some of your customers, but a typical virtualization environment has a mix of multi-user and single-user host pools. The primary reason for multi-user is to reduce costs and management overhead. We all know that a typical task or office worker rarely consumes the full resources of their desktop. If you were to provision each user to their peak needs, you'd be paying for a lot of resources that you're not using, which is the white space in this image. Now, if we consider a real-world scenario where I have 24 of these task workers, and I were to provision VDI instances in the cloud, inefficient use of resources start to create a significant gap between what I'm paying for and what I'm using. In this case, I would require 48 vCPUs and 96 gig of RAM. Now, we know that typical virtualization deployments have pools of identical virtual machines that host a large number of users, and you as the IT admin want control over how users are allocated across those virtual machine pools. Windows Virtual Desktop provides two core load balancing methods to provision users to VM host pools. The first and default mode is breadth mode, which evenly allocates users across the available VMs in a host pool. This helps to ensure that users are getting the maximum amount of resources. Windows Virtual Desktop also supports depth mode, which allocates users to a single VM before allocating users to the next VM in the host pool. This mode allows you to better control your variable costs, as you can spin up additional VMs as needed using the Windows Virtual Desktop scaling tools. The service will dynamically adjust user allocation based on the amount of virtual machines available. Microsoft provides a few scaling templates you can use, or you can modify them to create your own scaling algorithm to meet the needs of your business. This is the high-level architecture of Windows Virtual Desktop, and as you can see on the right-hand side, starting at the top, Microsoft will manage web access, diagnostics, gateway, management, broker, and load balancing. This is the PaaS or Platform as a Service part of the solution. You would then control and decide on such things as what operating system, applications, and how you want to access the environment. Microsoft then manages the underlying virtualization of that IaaS infrastructure, such as the compute, storage, and network. And this has to be designed to your business specifications, so you'll have to have input on design considerations such as IP address ranges and network address schemas. This diagram shows a typical architectural setup for an enterprise Windows Virtual Desktop deployment. The application endpoints are in the customer's on-prem network on the left-hand side. ExpressRoute then extends that on-prem network into the Azure Cloud, and the Azure Active Directory Connect integrates the customer's Active Directory domain services with Azure Active Directory. The Windows Virtual Desktop control plane handles web access, gateway, broker, diagnostics, and extensibility components like REST APIs. The customer manages Active Directory domain services and Azure Active Directory, Azure subscriptions, virtual networks, Azure Files or Azure NetApp Files in this case for profile containers, and the Windows Virtual Desktop host pools and workspaces. To increase capacity, the customer uses two Azure subscriptions in a hub and spoke architecture. It connects them via a virtual network peering connection. Let me show you what Windows Virtual Desktop looks like from an end user's perspective. I have three host pools set up in my environment. One with Windows 10 multi-session desktop, which I've assigned to 3 users. I'm also publishing some apps from this host pool, which I've assigned to users 2 and 3. I have a host pool which contains a personal desktop, which I've assigned to user 1. This virtual machine has Windows 10 single session, And finally, I've got a Hostpool with Windows 7 machine, which I've also assigned to user 1. So let's take a look at what that looks like for my 3 users when they subscribe to the service.
So here I am logged into the Azure portal, and as you can see, I have pinned the Windows Virtual Desktop tile to my dashboard. If I go into the tile, I'll be presented with the Windows Virtual Desktop 2020 Spring Update management plane. And from here, you can see the management capabilities. So I can create host pools, application groups, workspaces, and users. And now the whole solution is managed from here. So the 3 host pools that I've got set up, I've just named them Ingram Micro Cloud Proof of Concept, Hostpool 1, 2, and 3. I can see the resource group that they're in, the location of the metadata, my subscription, the Hostpool type. So this is pooled, these are personal. Pooled is for lots of users to log on to a multi-session operating system like Windows 10. The load balancing type for my Hostpool, and this one is breadth first, which means each user will log on to the next host in the Hostpool. And you can see I've got 2 application groups in there. One application group is a full desktop. The other application group is a bunch of applications that are being published. So let's have a quick look at what that looks like. So this is my Windows 10 multi-session host pool. I've got 2 session hosts in there. These are the session hosts. They're on and available. I've got no active sessions, no users assigned, and some information about the individual session hosts. The application groups, so this is the desktop application group, which is presenting my Windows 10 multi-session desktop to my 3 users. And this is the application group that is publishing my applications, and these are the applications that are being published. To assign users to these application groups, you can see from the application group that it's assigned to a workspace. So my Hostpool 1 is in workspace 1, Hostpool 2 is in workspace 2, and so on. To assign users to these services, so for the full desktop, if I want to assign users to my application group, my desktop application group, which is my full desktop, I can just go into here, assignments, or here, and just add the users from Azure Active Directory. You can see I've added these users 1, 2, and 3 in there. And in the applications, I've assigned 2 users to the applications, the same format of assigning users. And these users are from my on-prem Active Directory, been synchronized into Azure Active Directory. So that's the first host pool. It contains a full desktop and some applications in 2 separate application groups. Hostpool 2 contains a personal desktop. You can have pooled or personal host pools. So in here is a full desktop assigned to 1 single user. So the application again is a session desktop. It's just a personal desktop for a single user. The assignments, I can assign users from within this management blade. And the same for my third host pool. This is a Windows 7 virtual machine, which I can assign to users in the same way. You can see that from this desktop application group, I've just assigned a single user. So user 1 will see all 3 workspaces, host pools, and we'll be able to have access to all of the services, where users 2 and 3 have access to Hostpool 2 and just Hostpool 1. So let's have a look at what that looks like for users logging into the service. If you're signing into Windows Virtual Desktop using Windows, you can use either a desktop client, which you can download from the Microsoft Docs, and I'll show you where that is in a later slide, or you can use the web client. This is the Windows Virtual Desktop client, and I'll show you user 1 logging in or subscribing to the service using this, and users 2 and 3 using different browsers to access my host pool. So for user 1, they simply select Add, select Workspaces, and enter this URL to the feed discovery. They're then going to log in with their on-prem credentials, which have been synchronized to Azure Active Directory. So this is user 1 in my Azure Active Directory. And if you remember, user 1 has access to all 3 host pools, so should see everything that I'm publishing in different workspaces. So this is workspace 1. It has the published apps under full desktop, which is the Windows 10 multi-session, Hostpool 2 inside workspace 2, which has a personal desktop, and Hostpool 3 inside workspace 3, which has a Windows 7 desktop. You can minimize these, change the name of them, purely for management capabilities of how you want to lay out your infrastructure for your users. So to log on to the Windows 10 multi-session desktop for my user 1, I simply click on the icon and it's going to take me to a connect screen. Now with this new remote desktop client, you have the capability to add your users up front. You can see I can just add the account, put the credentials in, and then connect to save me logging on lots of times. So this is user 1 logging in. FSLogix is configured, his profile is configured, and he has a Windows 10 full desktop. So while he's doing that, let me pull up the 2 browsers and log in with users 2 and 3 and to the same host pool and see what that looks like. So you can see user 1 logged in, Teams is opened, there's a full desktop, pretty much the same as he would have if he was in the office, all his apps, everything that he's used to. You can see which machine he's logged onto, which of the 2 session hosts in my host pool. So he's logged on to VM0. So let's log on to Windows Virtual Desktop using the web client with user 2. So for the web client, it's a slightly different address. Same process, he's going to subscribe to the service and then he will see what resources have been made available for him. So user 2 logging in. And as you can see, user 2 only sees workspace 1, whereas user 1 sees workspace 2 and 3, which we assigned in the portal in the solution. So for user 2 to access the multi-session desktop, same process, simply click the icon and log on with your on-prem credentials. So user 2. And you'll notice straight away that at the top of the browser there's a new tab. And this new tab is for my Windows 10 multi-session session. See FSLogix being configured, my profile getting configured, and me logging onto my Windows 10 session. So that's 2 users logged on to my Windows 10 session. So again, you can see different tabs for the different resources. If I open WordPad, it'll be a new tab. And there's a little bit of additional functionality in the desktop client. So for example, there's no refresh here. So if I published a new application and assigned it to user 2, I'd have to refresh the browser. In the desktop client, I can use this refresh and it will appear almost immediately, any amendments that I make. So I've got my 2 users logged in. Here's user 1 on Windows 10, here's user 2 on Windows 10. And you can see they've both got access to the same apps, it's the same image, and they're both happily working away on different session hosts. So because this host pool was configured using the default load balancing method, which is breadth first, this user should now be on a different host, and you can see that he's connected to VM1 and this user is connected to VM0. Okay, so that's both users logged on. So if I open another browser and log on as user 3, the same web address, subscribe as user 3, user 3 logging on. And you'll see user 3 doesn't have access to the application group, which is in Hostpool 1. He just sees the full desktop. So user 2 can see the apps, but user 3 just sees the full desktop. So if I log on as user 3, this is the third user logging into my session hosts with my on-prem credentials. Password in. So he also is going to log on to the Windows 10 multi-session operating system and have his full desktop in a separate tab as well, as you can see. So there's his one resource available to him. And this is the, you can see Teams, involved in the Teams chat straight away because it's installed on the session hosts. And if you look at which machine this user is on, it should hit the next one. So if the last one was 1, this guy should be back on 0 because I've only got 2 session hosts. He's on 1, okay. So I've got 2 users on VM1, 1 user on VM0, load balanced across the 2, and they'll just keep switching over. So I can see now if I look at the users, I can see I've got users 2 and 3 on this machine. My performance is still reasonable, 5% of my CPU, half my memory is being used, but I've got 3 users all logged on to the same host pool. And they can all obviously Teams chat between each other and do all the normal things that you would expect them to do if they're in the office. So remote working capabilities, Windows 10 multi-session desktops in the cloud from Azure.
Now let's assume that I've tested my solution in my proof of concept lab and I want to now deploy another host pool that will have 2 session hosts to handle 50 or so users.
Creating host pools in the 2020 Spring Update of Windows Virtual Desktop is really straightforward. Let's walk through creating a new host pool for my 50 users. So if I go into host pools and select add to add a new host pool, I just need to fill in some basic information, then some information about the virtual machines that will form part of the host pool, a workspace, tags, review and create. So the first thing I need is a resource group. I'll use the existing resource group where the rest of my host pools and resources are. Give the host pool a name, and I want to keep the same naming convention. So I've got 1, 2 and 3, so I'm just going to use 4, host pool 04. Location of the metadata, which is fine in East US. This is not a validation environment, and I want a pooled host pool. Once I select pooled, it's going to ask me the amount of users that can log on to each session, the maximum amount of users before the next user will be directed to the next session host in the pool, and then the default load balancing algorithm. Remember, I've got breadth first and depth first, so I'm just going to leave the breadth first default. Once I've completed that basic information, I just need to add some information about the virtual machines in the host pool. So firstly, the location of the virtual machines, and they're going to be in the UK South where my infrastructure resides. And then the size of the virtual machine. So for the purpose of this demo, I'm just going to use B4MS, which has got 4 virtual CPUs, 16 gig of RAM, 8 data disks, 2800 IOPS. I've got temporary storage of 32 gig, and it's about 100 quid a month, just over. So that should be fine for my 50 users. Let's just create 2 for the purpose of this. And then I can give my virtual machines a prefix in order to identify them. So let's say this is going to be for my production environment, so WVD prod-VM. So I'll have VM 0 and 1 for my 2 session hosts. Then the image. So this is going to be a gallery image, and it can be gallery or blob. Where does the image reside? So we're using a gallery image, and I'm going to use the Windows 10 Enterprise Multi-Session version 2004, which is optimized for Office 365. I can select the type of disk, whether I want standard SSDs, premium SSDs, or standard hard drives. And then the network has been picked up from the location of my infrastructure. and then public IPs. So I don't need any public IPs open. 3389 is closed in this solution. So there's no inbound ports. I'm using a basic NSG, network security group, which is where the rules are applied for my networking. So 3389 is disallowed in the NSG. And then I can specify the domain that these virtual machines are going to join. Because remember, these session hosts need to be part of a domain. So my domain happens to be called onprem.com. I can specify an additional OU if I want to put them in a specific OU in my Active Directory, which I don't. And then I just need the person that's going to join the machines to the domain, who has permissions to join these machines to the domain. So this is my user who has the permissions to join the machine to the domain. So I'll just complete that. And it's important you get this correct, or the deployment will fail on this particular section, trying to join the machine to the domain. So then we just need to register the desktop application group, which will be created for me inside a workspace. So I've got workspace 1, 2, and 3. So it makes sense to create a fourth workspace 04. Okay, so once I've filled in all that information. I'm not using tags. Tags are good for reporting purposes if you want to report on a specific department or location or region. So then I go ahead and validate the deployment. If it validates okay, I can just hit create and it will go off and create these two B4MS virtual machines inside a Hostpool for my users to log on to. So while that's creating, we can just have a quick look at what's being created. It shouldn't take long to create because there are only two virtual machines and they're being built simultaneously. I've got my domain that they're going to join up and running here. The machines are going to land in this OU once they've been created. And I'll then be able to assign users access to the desktop application group, and we can have a look at what it looks like for one of those users to log on to my new Hostpool. So I'll just pause the video until this is completed, and we'll come back and have a look at what's been created. Okay, so the deployment has completed. I can now see I've got an additional Hostpool 04. It's in the same resource group, same location, subscription. It's a pooled Hostpool, the default breadth first load balancing, and one application group, which should be my two B4MS session hosts. So if I go into the Hostpool, I can see I've got standard B4MS, two session hosts, both available. Have a quick look at those. There's the two session hosts, my prod VM0 and prod VM1, both available inside my desktop application group. So this hasn't been assigned to anybody yet. So if I want to assign somebody to the desktop application group, I go into the application group, click on assignment, and let's just add WVD user 1 using my Azure AD. Add user 1. Okay, so user 1 now has access to my new Hostpool. Just go back to the Hostpool itself, see the session hosts. Okay, so let's log in with user 1 and have a quick look what he now sees. So I'll just open a new in private, go to RD Web and log in with user 1. Password in. Hopefully user 1 now sees the new Hostpool in workspace 04. There we go. So you can see it's just got the default desktop for now. name, which I can obviously change. We've seen that. If I go into the Hostpool properties and give it a friendly name of WVD Prod, for example, that's updated, and now my user should be able to pick up that update by refreshing his browser. It's not updated yet. The name of the desktop will update. My user can just click that, log in as normal. Let's do that and log in with his on-prem credentials because single sign-in is configured for Azure Active Directory users. So this is on-prem user 1. Remember, in a browser, users get a new tab to log into the desktop. So just confirm that it's logged into the new session host, which has just literally been created. So again, this is a multi-session operating system, Windows 10 multi-session for VDI. You can see there, and you can see it's on Prod VM1, which we'll be able to see and confirm from the Hostpool. You can see now we've got one active session. If we go into the session host on Prod VM1, we should see that active session. And user logged in, WVD user 1. So that's how to create a Hostpool really quickly for your users in your on-prem environment to be able to access Windows Virtual Desktop and start.
These 4 links will get you quickly up to speed with the Windows Virtual Desktop 2020 Spring Update. The first link is the landing page for Windows Virtual Desktop, where you'll see an overview of the service and essentially links to all areas. The tutorials are what I use to create my Hostpools, and I have how-tos for all features, including setting up template images, user profile containers, FSLogix, and finally, you'll need the free discovery URL in order to connect to the service, which you can get from the Connect with Windows Desktop Client link. Microsoft are focused on 3 dimensions to how you can reduce costs and spend. You can make huge savings on the underlying Azure infrastructure, which is already an efficient, scalable compute, storage, and networking cloud infrastructure that you can build on. Azure also provides tools to let you manage the utilization of that infrastructure, whether it's scaling up or down, also shutting down VMs or using Windows 10 multi-session in a Windows Virtual Desktop environment, which lets you have scalability of Windows Server session hosts with a user experience you would get from a Windows 10 enterprise client. You can save on licensing because access to Windows Virtual Desktop is included with your M365 A3 or A5 or E3 or E5 licenses or Business Premium, which saves on RDS cards. And the total cost of ownership goes down because you don't have to spend on your IT department's energy and looking at gateways, brokers, or infrastructure VMs, or patching those VMs, or doing any of the work to keep that infrastructure up and running. The underlying infrastructure for the service is managed by Microsoft. So you only need to focus on the users, apps, and operating system images that you decide to use. You can use Azure Advisor to find best practices, and you can deploy the solution using the Azure Portal or WVD Quick Start template for an automated deployment. You can quickly scale the solution by adding or removing additional session hosts, and you can use built-in monitoring with Azure Monitor and Log Analytics. Microsoft have invested heavily in how the service can work better for partners that are scaling up over the last year. Let me walk you through some of those investments. The first big investment has been around security and compliance. So Microsoft has invested in certifications in the security space, including ISO, PCI, HIPAA, which makes it possible to use Windows Virtual Desktop in sectors that are more heavily regulated and might need that extra layer of compliance. Diving a bit deeper into security, because Windows Virtual Desktop is part of the overall Azure platform, it benefits from the comprehensive security capabilities that Azure has to offer. These capabilities are tightly integrated and they're designed to work well together. This means that organizations can take a 360-degree view of the security of their Windows Virtual Desktop deployment in Azure. So looking across identity, the session host, the apps you're running in your sessions and VMs, the infrastructure you run on, and then your network and data layers, and being able to look at all those pieces and get a holistic view and a sense of confidence across all of them. On the identity front, things like conditional access and multi-factor authentication give you extra confidence in situations where, for example, a username and password become compromised. Attackers will still be denied access to your environment. Defender ATP includes Microsoft's next generation antivirus protection on the session host, which is enabled by default. Then you can set up policies on the session host and manage things like security updates, to control device redirection, set time limits for auto log off and disconnect, etc. And generally to make sure that nothing's left open when it should be shut down. With App Locker and application control, you have the ability to control all the apps that you're running in the VMs. So you have confidence over what code is running on the VM and what things they have access to. And at the infrastructure level between Azure Security Center and Secure Score, you'll get a scan of complete subscription that will give you insights and feedback on how to stay secure based on your specifics of your deployment. Microsoft have also published a ton of best practice on how to secure your services on Azure, which you can follow to ensure you're getting the most from your deployment. At the network level, there are things like Reverse Connect, which allow you to operate your VMs without having to open inbound ports. So you can also use things like service tags and Azure Firewall to manage traffic in and out of the deployment at the network layer. And then at the data layer, information protection is a great way to protect data, even if it leaves your deployment. What it does, it puts a layer around the data so it protects it in a way that it can't be viewed without the correct credentials. And then Azure Disk Encryption goes hand in hand with BitLocker to keep all of your data encrypted inside the VM itself. So as you can see, a lot of work has been done to ensure you can secure your deployment and get it working in the right way. The next area that Microsoft have invested in is around usability. One of the top asks of Microsoft last year was the ability to have a point-and-click interface for administering your WVD deployment. And you saw in the portal earlier in the webinar how easy it is to get up and running with Windows Virtual Desktop. Another new feature, which is now also GA, is AV redirection with Microsoft Teams. Let me show you what that looks like and how that works. Traditionally, we're making a real-time communications connection in Windows Virtual Desktop. What happens is the traffic of the call is routed between the VMs. With AV redirection in Microsoft Teams, a point-to-point connection is created between the two endpoints using WebRTC. And this is a much more efficient way of connecting to endpoints, and it creates a much better user experience for the people on the call. They get better latency and a more natural calling experience. But above and beyond the improved user experience, you also get improved performance for your session hosts as well. So your utilization in your VM goes down, so you can get better density to reduce costs. To give you a view of that performance, this slide has just two screenshots of Task Manager, one running without AV redirection and one running with the Teams optimization that takes advantage of AV redirection. And you can see that there's a reduction from 12% CPU usage to 1.5% CPU usage, which is a huge reduction that goes right down to the VM density you're able to pack into the VM, which is a huge cost saving if you have users doing a lot of calling and collaboration. Microsoft announced the following updates to Windows Virtual Desktop at the recent Virtual Ignite event. I'll go into more details on these upcoming updates in the next L100 WVD webinar, but as you can see, there are a bunch of new capabilities for the service. Capabilities around security for Windows Virtual Desktop will include Microsoft Endpoint Manager integration, single sign-on with ADFS, and a new screen scraping protection capability which will disable the ability to take or to use tools such as Snippet to take a screen grab of your screen content within your session hosts. On the usability front, MSI App Attach will be brought into the Azure portal, so you'll be able to attach applications to your sessions without installing them. Be able to direct RDP to the session host for better management capabilities, and use an ARM migration tool to bring your existing RDS solutions into Windows Virtual Desktop. For scalability, there's a new Azure Monitor workbook which integrates with Azure Monitor and Log Analytics to enable scaling, and a new cost-saving feature called Start VM on Connect. So just before I wrap up this WVD L100 webinar, I'd like to give you a quick glimpse of the upcoming cost-saving feature, Start VM on Connect. So you can see at the bottom, the red box, the Start VM on Connect option is highlighted, saying yes. This is going to be one of the properties for the Hostpool. So this feature is going to allow you to power down your session hosts, save on cost, and when your users need to work, the session host will just power up as soon as the user connects. Microsoft have advised that this feature will be available this year. And as you know, Microsoft are constantly updating the service, and on the next webinar we'll go into a lot more detail on the infrastructure requirements for Windows Virtual Desktop, including Azure AD Connect, setting up FSLogix profile containers, and much more. So make sure you register for the L300, which, as I mentioned earlier, will be split into two parts. I hope that's given you an insight into the new 2020 Spring Update of Windows Virtual Desktop. And if you do have any questions, I'll be around after the webinar for a Q&A session. So if you get your questions ready, I'll talk to you shortly on the Q&A. Thanks everyone for joining the Windows Virtual Desktop 2020 Spring Update L100 today. I hope you found it useful and informative. My contact details are on the screen, so do feel free to reach out to me with any burning questions or anything around Azure or Windows Virtual Desktop. And as a quick reminder, I'll be hosting the WVD L300 Spring Update webinar Part A next week, which will cover off the service in more detail and take a closer look at some of the new features. I will make sure everyone here has sent a registration for that, but in the meantime, I'll be available shortly for a Q&A session, as I mentioned, on Windows Virtual Desktop. So have your questions ready and I'll do my best to answer them for you. Okay, with that, I'm going to dial into the conference bridge for the Q&A, so I'll see you over there. Hi.